The Duke of Crestwell told his valet she was pretty enough and sharp as a spoon. She was a clergyman's daughter with no money, no rank, and no interest in pretending otherwise. He was a man who hadn't laughed in 2 years and didn't know why he kept finding reasons to be in the same room as her. She found out what he said. She didn't flinch. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. London, April 1815. The invitation had come on a Thursday, which Clara Voss had always considered an unlucky day for correspondence. Her cousin, Mrs. Hartwell, had written in her usual breathless style 3 pages of enthusiasm compressed into a single run-on sentence to say that she was opening her townhouse in Bruton Street for the season, that she required company of the sensible variety, and that Clara, being both sensible and currently without better occupation, was the obvious candidate. There was mention of assemblies, there was mention of introductions. There was buried in the second page, between a digression about new curtains and a complaint about the price of candles, a sentence that read, "You are not getting any younger, dear, and nor am I, and London in April is really very agreeable if one does not mind the smell." Clara had minded the smell. She had come anyway. Mrs. Hartwell's townhouse was narrow and cheerful, staffed by 3 servants who had been with the family since before Clara was born, and who therefore felt entirely entitled to their opinions about everything. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pond, had looked Clara up and down upon arrival, and announced that she was thinner than expected, as though Clara had failed to meet a specification. Clara had thanked her for the observation. Mrs. Pond had nodded, satisfied, and gone to see about tea. That had been 2 weeks ago. In those 2 weeks, Clara had attended 4 drawing-room visits, 2 card evenings, 1 concert that had lasted 3 hours longer than advertised, and a morning call during which her cousin had described the entire Crestwell family history to a woman who had not asked. The Crestwell family history, as delivered by Mrs. Hartwell, was as follows. The old Duke had died the previous autumn, unexpectedly, which meant that Frederick Aubrey Crestwell had inherited a dukedom he had not been preparing for, a London house he had not visited in 4 years, and a reputation for being difficult that had been earned, depending on who you asked, either entirely or not quite. He was a second son, Mrs. Hartwell had explained, with the gravity of a woman delivering a diagnosis. One never quite recovers from that. From being a second son, Clara had asked. From suddenly not being one. Clara had filed this information away under probably relevant to someone, and thought no more about it until the evening of Lady Alderton's musical gathering, when she found herself standing near the pianoforte with a glass of mediocre wine, watching the door. She was not, strictly speaking, watching the door. She was watching the painting above the door, which depicted a hunting scene of no particular merit but considerable size, and which had the advantage of being positioned such that one could observe arrivals without appearing to do so. Clara had developed this skill at her father's parish, where watching without appearing to watch was essential survival equipment. The Duke of Crestwell arrived at 8:30. She knew who he was before anyone said his name. There was something in the way the room reorganized itself, subtle, like a tide shifting, that announced rank before rank announced itself. Conversations paused a half-beat, backs straightened. Lady Alderton, who had been complaining about the cost of beeswax candles to a colonel, pivoted toward the door with an expression that suggested beeswax could wait. He was tall, dark-haired, going to silver at the temples in a way that looked less like age and more like intention. He wore his evening clothes as though they were the least interesting thing about him, which, Clara suspected, was exactly the effect he was aiming for. His face was, the word that came to her was set, not cold, set. The way a jaw is set when someone has decided some time ago that the present moment will not be permitted to surprise him. He surveyed the room with the particular expression of a man attending a function he had agreed to attend and was already reconsidering. His Grace the Duke of Crestwell, Mrs. Hartwell murmured at Clara's elbow, appearing from nowhere with the timing of a woman who had been waiting to deploy this information. You see, exactly as I described. You described him as difficult, Clara said. Yes, Mrs. Hartwell sounded pleased, and there he is. Lady Alderton reached him. There was a brief exchange, a bow, a smile on her ladyship's part that cost something in dignity, a response from him that was technically cordial and communicated nothing whatsoever. He moved through the room the way water moves around stone, deflecting without effort. Clara returned her attention to the hunting scene above the door. She did not speak to him that evening. He did not speak to her. She was introduced to a Mr. Cavendish Price, who was amiable and interested in drainage schemes, and a Mrs. Fellows, who was neither amiable nor interested in anything except the movements of a young man across the room who was, Clara gathered, her nephew and currently doing something inadvisable with his card play. The music, when it finally happened, was competent. Clara drank her wine. She watched the painting. At some point the Duke passed within 6 feet of her on his way to the door. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. She did note, with the detached interest of someone cataloguing a species, that up close his expression was not set so much as held. The distinction mattered. Set was armour chosen in the morning. Held was something being managed in the moment. She thought, he is tired of being here. Then she thought, so am I. He left at 9:30. The room exhaled fractionally and returned to its previous shape. The second encounter happened at Almack's, because in London in April most things happened at Almack's eventually. Almack's had its own logic, which Clara was still learning. The vouchers were difficult to obtain and essential to have. The refreshments were notoriously poor. The dancing was not the point. The dancing was the mechanism by which one achieved the point, which was to be seen by the correct people doing the correct things with the correct partners, and for this information to travel by the usual invisible channels to whoever needed to know it. Mrs. Hartwell had vouchers. She had obtained them through a combination of persistence and a long-standing friendship with one of the patronesses, whose name she dropped with the frequency and precision of someone operating artillery. Clara had her own voucher, procured by the same means, and wore it like light armour. Lydia had arrived the previous Thursday. This was the complication Clara had not entirely anticipated when she accepted the London invitation. Lydia was 19 and lovely in the way that made practical people nervous, the kind of lovely that attracted attention without yet having learned to manage it. She had their father's blue eyes and their mother's laugh, and an absolute gift for being in the wrong place at the precise wrong moment. She had come to London, she said, to see Clara. Clara understood this to mean that she had come to London to see London, and Clara was the acceptable pretext. She was not, on the whole, a troublesome girl. She was simply 19 and in London in April, which amounted to the same thing. At Almack's, Lydia danced the first 2 sets with a Mr. Beaumont, who was personable and appropriate, and then the third with a Captain Aldridge, who was neither. Clara knew about Captain Aldridge by reputation, which was the useful kind of knowledge, because it allowed one to form a view before being charmed out of it. He was handsome. He was 28. He had a way of focusing his attention on a young woman that made her feel she was the only person in the room, which Clara considered a dangerous skill and not a virtue. His finances were, by all accounts, in the condition of someone who had treated income as an optional feature of adult life. His regiment had received orders, Belgium, it was said, within the month, which made his presence in London feel less like leisure than like a man making arrangements before a door closed. She watched Lydia dance with him and thought, 3 more days and she'll be writing poetry. She was, in this prediction, approximately accurate. The Duke was present at Almack's, which surprised her. She had not imagined him as a man who attended Almack's voluntarily. He was standing with a small group near the east wall, which was where people stood when they wished to observe without participating. And Clara, who had been doing precisely the same thing, noticed him the way she supposed one noticed weather. Not because one had looked for it, but because it was there. He was listening to a Lord something Pemberton with the expression of a man making a credible impression of interest, while thinking about something else entirely. Clara looked away. 10 minutes later, she was crossing the room with Lydia's shawl, which Lydia had abandoned near the chairs and would eventually need, and she walked directly past him. He looked at her, she looked at him, neither stopped walking. She delivered the shawl. She returned to her position near the wall. He was still there. He had apparently escaped Lord something Pemberton. She did not look at him. She watched Lydia, who was now in conversation with Captain Aldridge near the lemonade table, and considered the geometry of a mild, uncreative intervention. "You are cataloguing something," said a voice to her left. She turned. He was 2 feet away, which was nearer than she had registered. "I beg your pardon," she said. "You have been watching the room the way a person watches a room when they are counting something." He looked at her with dark eyes, the brown of very old wood and about as readable. "I wondered what you were counting." "Exits," Clara said before she could decide whether to say it. A pause, not uncomfortable, assessing. "There are 4. he said. "The main doors, the east corridor, the door behind the musicians that leads to the card room, and a servant's passage that is technically not for guests, but is used by them reliably after midnight." Clara looked at him. "You have counted them yourself." "I always count exits. As a habit or a precaution. In places like this," he said, "the distinction is academic." She almost smiled. She did not quite. "Miss Clara Voss," she said, because he had not been introduced to her and showed no sign of considering this an obstacle. "My cousin is Mrs. Hartwell of Bruton Street." "Crestwell," he said. He did not add the title. She had the impression this was not modesty but economy. "The girl you were watching, the one near the lemonade, is she your sister?" "She is." "Captain Aldridge," he said, "is not—" He stopped. "I am aware of what Captain Aldridge is not," Clara said pleasantly. "Thank you." He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately name. Then Lady Alderton appeared at his elbow. She seemed to appear at his elbow everywhere, like a well-dressed barnacle. And the moment closed. "Your Grace," Lady Alderton said, radiating the particular satisfaction of a woman who had secured a duke for her evening. "I have been hoping to introduce you to—" He went. Clara watched him go with the mild interest of someone watching weather move on to someone else's county. She retrieved Lydia from the lemonade table 17 minutes later, under the pretext of a headache that both of them knew she did not have. A week later, the Hatherswick Library was not, strictly speaking, open to either of them. Sir Thomas Hatherswick had thrown open his townhouse for an afternoon reception, and the library had been designated a quiet room for those who needed respite from the occasion. Clara had needed respite from the occasion approximately 40 minutes into it, at the point where a Mrs. Granger had begun to explain, in anatomical detail, the correct way to arrange a floral centerpiece. The library held the particular quality of silence that only rooms built for books can manage. Not empty silence, but full silence, the kind that has weight and texture. 3 walls of shelves, 2 windows facing the garden, a writing desk with nothing on it, 2 chairs positioned before an unlit fireplace, with the confidence of chairs that had been there long enough to consider themselves permanent. Clara was examining the shelves. Hatherswick's taste ran to history and natural philosophy, with a notable gap where one might expect poetry, which she found either revealing or simply practical, when the door opened. She did not turn immediately. The footstep was singular and unhurried, and she had already categorized it in the wordless way one does, as not a threat and not an intrusion before she had consciously processed any of it. "Miss Voss." She turned. Crestwell stood in the doorway with the expression of a man who had come to a quiet room and found it less quiet than anticipated, and was revising his expectations in real time. "Your Grace," she said. She did not move from the shelves. "You also require respite." "Mrs. Granger," he said by way of complete explanation. "The centerpieces," Clara agreed. He came in. He did not, she noticed, leave the door open behind him. He left it at the precise angle of not quite closed, which was the only socially permissible position, and one that required conscious thought. She logged this without remarking on it. He went to the other wall of shelves. He scanned them with the brief, efficient look of someone who has already read most things and is hoping for a pleasant surprise. "Hatherswick," he said, "does not read poetry." "I noticed." Clara turned back to her own examination. "Natural philosophy and military history. He reads to confirm what he already believes, I think." A pause. "That is either a perceptive observation or an unkind one." "In my experience," Clara said, "those categories overlap considerably." She heard him move, not toward her, to the other chair, the one furthest from the fireplace, where he sat with the compact efficiency of a man accustomed to occupying spaces without requiring them to rearrange themselves for him. She selected a volume, Hatherswick's copy of Cook's Voyages, which was well worn in a way that suggested genuine reading rather than display, and took the other chair. They sat in silence for a moment. It was not uncomfortable. It was, in fact, the most comfortable Clara had been in 10 days. "Your sister," he said without preamble, "danced with Aldridge again last Tuesday." "I know." "He will ask to call. His regiment has orders for Belgium, within the month, most likely. That makes a man either cautious or hasty, and Aldridge has never struck me as cautious." "I expect he'll call," Clara said. She looked up from the cook. "I am accustomed to managing things, Your Grace. It is largely what I do." He looked at her. In the library's quieter light, the afternoon coming grey through the garden windows, his face was less set than it had been at Almack's. Not open, but less armoured. "What else do you do?" he asked. The question was so direct that it took her a moment to answer it. In her experience, men of his rank did not ask questions of that shape. They asked questions designed to confirm what they assumed, or they made observations designed to be agreed with. "I read," she said. "I correspond with my father, who is a clergyman in Derbyshire, and sends me letters of considerable theological density. I walk when the weather permits, and when it does not. I watch rooms." She paused. "I count exits." His mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more controlled than that, and more genuine for being controlled. "And before London?" he asked. "Before London was much the same, with better air and fewer centrepieces." "You preferred it." "I prefer honesty to performance," Clara said. "London is almost entirely performance." "And yet you are here." "Lydia is here," she said. "I am where Lydia is. That is the arrangement." He was quiet for a moment. The garden beyond the windows was doing something with the light, a cloud moving or a tree, and the room shifted briefly between grey and gold. "You did not come for yourself," he said. "No, not even a little." She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Perhaps a little. Mrs. Hartwell is fond company, and Derbyshire in March is—" She paused. "Very Derbyshire." This time he did smile. It happened quickly, like a door opened and closed before one could see what was behind it, but it happened. "I understand," he said, "the specific despair of a county in March. You have an estate in the country?" "Two." He said it without inflection, not pride, not complaint, fact. "Northumberland and Somerset, both in March, are," he considered, "characterful." "That is a diplomatic word for it." "I am on occasion diplomatic." "On occasion," Clara agreed. He picked up a volume from the small table beside the chair. She hadn't noticed it before, left by a previous occupant, and turned it over. Cowper's Poems. He set it back down. "You said," he said, "at Almack's, that you were aware of what Aldridge is not." "I did." "What are you going to do about it?" Clara looked at him. The question was blunt, and she decided to answer it bluntly. "I am going to ensure that my sister is never alone with him long enough to do anything irreversible, while managing to appear so unconcerned that she does not perceive herself as being managed. Because the moment she does, she will do the irreversible thing out of principle." A pause. "She sounds," he said carefully, "like someone I would find exhausting." "She is 19, Clara said. "She is exactly what she should be. She just needs—" She stopped. She had not intended to say it to him. She had not intended to say it to anyone. "She needs someone to make better things available to her than what Aldridge is offering. That is the whole of my strategy." He turned the cowper over in his hands again, as though he had forgotten he had set it down. "That is," he said, "an unusually charitable approach to management." "Did you expect a less charitable one?" "From most people in your position, yes." "Your position." She noticed the phrase without reacting to it. Her position, a clergyman's daughter in a borrowed London season, sitting in a room she had no claim to, discussing her manageable sister with a duke who had no particular reason to be interested. She noticed it the way one notices a wrong note, briefly, and then moved on. "Most people in my position," she said, "have learned that managing people is more effective when they don't notice they're being managed." "And the people who do notice?" "Leave the room," she said. She met his eyes. "As you could do at any moment, of course." The room was quiet. Outside someone laughed, from the party they had both left, and the sound came through the walls as a distant, irrelevant thing. "I could," he said. He did not move. The morning call happened 3 days later, and Clara had been expecting it. Captain Aldridge arrived at Bruton Street at 11, which was the correct hour and therefore the only correct thing about the visit. He was handsome in person in the way he was handsome at a distance, deliberately, as though he had arranged his features with care each morning and checked them at intervals. He brought flowers for Lydia, which was appropriate, and a specific kind of attention, focused, warm, designed, that Clara watched operate on her sister like a mechanism she could see but not interfere with while it was running. Mrs. Hartwell received him in the front parlour. Clara sat with her embroidery, which she did not do, and listened. He was charming. She gave him that. His conversation was easy and bright, and he had the gift of asking questions and then listening to the answers, or performing listening with sufficient accuracy that the distinction didn't matter in the short term. He asked Lydia about Derbyshire. He asked her about her interests. He managed in 20 minutes to make her feel that her opinions about landscape and music and the latest novel were not only interesting, but important. Clara watched her sister's face and thought, 3 weeks. 3 weeks before it was a serious attachment. 3 weeks before their father's letters from Derbyshire started arriving in a different tone entirely. She did not dislike Aldridge. That would have been simpler. He was not a villain. He was a man of moderate charm and poor finances and optimistic habits, none of which were crimes, and all of which were, in combination, a problem. Belgium, she thought, was at least a natural end to his London availability, unless he arranged matters before his regiment sailed. When he left, Lydia turned to Clara with an expression of such transparent happiness that Clara felt the precise ache of someone who knows something a person they love does not. "He is very agreeable," Lydia said. "He is," Clara said. She bit off her thread. "Shall we walk? The park will be pleasant this morning." The park was not precisely pleasant. April was making its usual promises and failing to keep them, but it was open, and Clara needed open. They walked. Lydia talked. Clara listened and watched the path ahead. A nursemaid passed them with 2 small children on leading strings, tugging in opposite directions, with the focused determination of people who have not yet grasped consequences. They had been in the park perhaps 20 minutes when she saw him. He was on horseback at the far end of the path, with a companion she did not recognize, a lean man of about 40 who was speaking and gesturing in a way that suggested military habit. Crestwell was listening with his face in profile and his back very straight. He saw her at roughly the same moment she saw him. She knew because his conversation didn't pause. He was too controlled for that. But there was a fractional shift in his posture that she had no explanation for. He said something to his companion. They turned their horses. "Is that the Duke of Crestwell?" Lydia said at a volume Clara would have preferred lower. "It is. He is coming over. I noticed. Clara," Lydia's voice had dropped to a hiss of pure interest. "When did you meet the Duke of Crestwell?" "Almack's," Clara said, "and at the Hatherswick reception." "You didn't tell me." "You were discussing poetry with Captain Aldridge." Lydia opened her mouth, closed it. This was accurate, and she knew it. Crestwell drew up before them and dismounted, which he did not have to do and which was therefore a deliberate choice, and introduced his companion as Colonel Vane. The colonel was agreeable, attended to Lydia with appropriate courtesy, and had the gift of occupying a conversation without requiring one's full attention, which meant Clara was able to notice, in a sideways fashion, that Crestwell had placed himself slightly to her left and was watching the park ahead of them rather than her. "Miss Voss," he said, while the colonel was telling Lydia something about a musical performance he had attended the previous winter. "Your Grace, Aldridge called this morning." She turned to look at him. "How did you know that?" "Bruton Street," he said, "is on my way from my house to the park." "You saw his horse?" "I saw his horse." Clara considered this. She was not sure what to do with a duke who noted which horses were tied outside, which houses on his route to the park, and she was not going to ask him why he had been looking. "He is personable," she said. "He is." "And you are going to tell me something I already know?" "Probably," he said. "I spoke with his commanding officer at my club last week. Havers is not... He did not speak warmly of Aldridge's habits. There have been other young women, I gather. Similar circumstances. Modest means. Both situations resolved before anything permanent occurred, but not for want of Aldridge's trying." "How many others?" "2 in the past year." Clara absorbed this. Did Havers say so directly? Men at clubs speak directly when they have a reason to. He looked at the path ahead. "I am not inventing it." "I did not think you were." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you." He nodded once. "Can you use it?" "I can use it," she said. "The question is how." He said nothing further. They rejoined the others. The moment that cut him down happened the following Friday in Mrs. Hartwell's smaller sitting room, which had been pressed into service as a temporary card room during a dinner party of 12. Clara was there by accident. She had retreated from the main company on the pretext of a book, had found the sitting room occupied by 4 people playing whist, and had been recruited by Mr. Cavendish Price, who had mislaid his partner before she could explain that she was leaving. Crestwell arrived in the same fashion, approximately 15 minutes later. He took the chair across from her which placed them as partners and examined his cards with an expression that told her nothing about their quality. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace." They played. Cavendish Price and his partner, a Mrs. Dunlop, were competent. Crestwell was better than competent. He played with the economy of someone who had long since stopped needing to think about the mechanics and was operating on pure instinct. Clara was also better than competent. At the end of the second hand, which they won, Crestwell glanced at her across the table. "You have played a great deal," he said. "My father," Clara said, "had 4 parishioners who played cards and no one else within 5 miles. I was recruited at 8. And you were good at it. At 8 I was terrible. By 12 I was better than everyone in the room. My father chose to interpret this as a moral failing." She arranged her cards. He was not wrong. Cavendish Price laughed. Mrs. Dunlop smiled with the polite uncertainty of someone who had missed the joke. Crestwell said nothing, but he was looking at her with an expression she had begun cautiously, provisionally, to map. It was the expression he wore when something had surprised him, and he had not yet decided what to do about it. They played another hand. Clara took a trick she had not been expected to take. That, Crestwell said, was unexpected. "Evidently," she gathered the cards, "you assumed I would play defensively." "You had been playing defensively?" "I had been playing carefully," she said. "There is a difference. I was waiting for the hand where it would matter." He looked at her for a moment. "That is not how most people approach." "No," she agreed. "Most people announce their intentions immediately and wonder why they are predictable." She dealt. "You do not, I notice. You play as though you have already seen the end of the hand." "I try to." "It works," she said, "until someone else is doing the same thing and you have not accounted for it." The words settled between them with a precision she had not entirely planned. A pause. "Are you," he said very carefully, "describing cards?" "Yes," said Clara, "obviously." A silence. Then, unmistakably, a sound she would not have predicted. Crestwell laughed. Not the performative social laugh of a man executing charm. An actual laugh, short and genuine and caught off guard. The kind that happens before a person has arranged themselves to let it. He recovered immediately, looked at his cards. Mrs. Dunlop was consulting Cavendish Price about something. No one appeared to have noticed except Clara. She looked at her cards and said nothing, but she noted it the way one notes a first frost. Something has changed. The season is shifting. 3 weeks later, the cowper had been moved. She noticed it, because it was the kind of thing she noticed. The cowper that had been on the table in Hatherswick's library, the volume Crestwell had picked up and set down twice, was now on a table in Mrs. Hartwell's front parlour, because Mrs. Hartwell was friends with Lady Hatherswick, and Lady Hatherswick, clearing out the library for some improvement or other, had sent a box of volumes she thought Mrs. Hartwell might enjoy. Clara had unpacked the box herself. She had set the cowper on the parlour table without thinking, and then had stood looking at it for a moment that was longer than the situation warranted. She put it with the other books. She did not mention it to anyone. Lydia had stopped talking about Captain Aldridge at dinner. This was worse than when she had been talking about him, because it meant she was talking about him somewhere else, in letters, or in her own head, or in conversations with the young women she had met at Almack's, who were more sympathetic to the romance of a handsome captain and less familiar with the arithmetic. Clara had read 3 of Aldridge's letters. She had not read them by design. Lydia had left them, whether by accident or as a kind of indirect confidence, in the sitting room they shared. They were well written. That was the problem. He wrote with the same focused attention he paid in person, and his letters had the quality of conversation with someone who was interested in you specifically, not in you as a version of the type of girl who existed to be interested in. Clara put the letters back where she had found them. She wrote her father a brief, uninflammatory account of the season's progress, omitting Aldridge entirely, and posted it before she could think better of it. She needed to use what Crestwell had told her. She had been considering how for 2 weeks, not whether but how. She could not produce Havers like a document. She could not say, "A duke told me at the park," without explaining what a duke was doing telling her things at the park, which would raise questions she was not prepared to answer. She sat down and thought about it carefully, the way her father had taught her to think about difficult things, not from the conclusion backward, but from the truth forward. The truth was that Aldridge had done this before. The truth was that Lydia did not know it. The truth was that knowing it would hurt her, and that not knowing it would hurt her more, and later. Clara wrote Lydia's name at the top of a blank sheet of paper, and then wrote nothing else for some time. She told her on a Tuesday evening in the sitting room they shared, with the windows open, because the May air was doing what May air does in London when it briefly forgets to be disagreeable. She told her everything, not unkindly. She had spent several days deciding how to do it, and unkind had never been on the list. She put nothing between them on the table. She had no document, no letter, only what she had been told. And she said it plainly, and she watched her sister's face go through the sequence that she had predicted and still found difficult. Surprise, confusion, the instinct to disbelieve, and then the careful, quiet arithmetic of a girl realizing that the attention had been specific, not because she was specific, but because her circumstances were. Lydia did not cry. This surprised Clara. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the table for a long moment. 2 others, she said. Yes. And they were not harmed. Nothing irreversible. Clara said it carefully. You have not... No. Lydia looked up. Her eyes were dry and her expression was something Clara didn't have a name for. Not quite anger, not quite grief. I have not done anything irreversible. No. A pause. I thought he found me... Lydia stopped, started again. I thought he found me interesting. I know, Clara said. He's very good at that. Lydia was quiet for another moment. Then she said with a precision that reminded Clara, suddenly and sharply, of their father. Who told you? Clara had been expecting this. Someone with access to that information. Crestwell, Lydia said without inflection. Clara said nothing, which was an answer. Lydia looked at her sister. The evening light was doing something to the room, the particular gold of late May at 6 o'clock, and her expression when it arrived was not accusing. It was interested. He gave you information about a captain, Lydia said, because you needed it. Because I asked, Clara said, or near enough. Why would he do that? Clara looked at her sister and thought of several answers. She said, We are acquaintances of some standing. Acquaintances, Lydia repeated with the tone of someone filing a term under provisional. Go to bed, Clara said. You do not have to do anything about Aldridge tonight. I shall write him tomorrow, Lydia said with a calm that was more than composure. It was the calm of someone who had understood something and was now dealing with it. A note, declining his next call. That would be sensible. Yes, Lydia stood, paused at the door. Clara. Do not, Lydia said with great precision, call him an acquaintance to my face again. She left. Clara sat with the evening light and said nothing, because there was no one left to say it to. The Mortlake Ball was the last significant event of the season, before families began to retreat toward their counties, and Mrs. Hartwell had been anticipating it since February with the steady enthusiasm of someone who had booked a pleasure and intended to collect it. Clara had been anticipating it with the feeling of someone who could see the end of a chapter and was not sure what the next one held. The Mortlake house was large enough that its ballroom did not feel crowded, which was London's highest architectural virtue. The chandeliers were good. The orchestra was better than average. The company was, in the way of season-end gatherings, both festive and slightly elegiac. The particular atmosphere of a group of people enjoying something they are already beginning to remember. Lydia had come and was dancing and was fine. Not fine the way people are when they are pretending to be fine, but fine the way people are when they have made a decision and the decision has settled. She danced with Mr. Cavendish Price, who had asked her twice and seemed genuinely pleased each time, and with a young officer recently come up from the country who was sunburned in a way that suggested he had done it honestly. Clara was near the east wall, which was where she always ended up. Old habit. Count the exits, know the room. He was there before she turned. Miss Voss, he said. She turned. He was close, not improper, but closer than the wall usually permitted. Someone had compressed the room on that side. Your Grace. Crestwell, he said. He had said it to her before. Crestwell, not the title, but not in this tone, which was not a correction but something else. A small thing offered without ceremony. She looked at him. He was in evening clothes, and he had the same held quality she had noted the first night, something being managed. But tonight it was less controlled, not distressed, held differently, as though the thing being managed had changed. Lydia is well? He asked. She is. She is dancing with Cavendish Price. I noticed. He is, Crestwell said, adequate. High praise. It is from me. He looked at the dancers. She handled it well. She did. Clara paused. She is resilient. Like her sister. The words landed before she could prepare for them. Not said warmly. He was not a man who said things warmly as a general rule, but said as though they were true, as though he had observed a fact and was reporting it. She said, I am not particularly resilient, I am simply persistent. The difference, he said, in practice, is everything, she said. Resilience implies that things bounce off. Persistence implies that they don't and you keep going anyway. He was quiet. Which would you prefer to be? He asked. The question caught her entirely off guard. She looked at him, really looked the way she had been careful not to, because looking carefully at Crestwell was the kind of thing that had consequences she had not finished mapping. I have never been asked that, she said. I am asking. Resilient, she said after a moment. Obviously, but I appear to be the other kind. He looked at her. The ballroom moved around them, music, people, the specific warmth of a room full of candles and human proximity, and he looked at her as though he had been looking at her for some time and had only now stopped trying not to. I am leaving London, she said. The words came out before she had decided to say them. He was still. When? End of the week. Lydia and I both. Mrs. Hartwell will remain, but... She stopped. The season is nearly finished. It is the natural time to go. Yes, he said. The orchestra shifted from one piece to another. A couple moved past them, laughing. Miss Voss, he said. She waited. He seemed to be deciding something. She could see it. Not the content, but the mechanics of it. The slight tension in his jaw. The controlled stillness of a man who is thinking and will not let you see the thinking. I was engaged to be married, he said, 3 years ago. He said it in the same tone with which he had said 2 estates, a fact, reported. She died, in the autumn. Clara said nothing. She understood from the quality of his silence that this was not information he distributed freely. I am sorry, she said. Yes, he looked at the dancers. Everyone is. What was she like? The question surprised him. A brief flicker, genuine. As though he had been prepared for how dreadful and you must have been devastated and had not prepared for the actual question. Quiet, he said. She thought carefully before she spoke. She was not... He stopped. She was not like you. No, Clara said. I imagine not. That is not... He caught himself. I did not mean it as a comparison. I know, she said. I did not take it as one. The orchestra played. Lydia spun past them in Cavendish Price's arms, and Clara watched her sister's face, bright, uncomplicated, present, and felt the ache of someone looking at something they have kept safe, and knowing it has cost them something they cannot name. She is why you came to London, Crestwell said. He had followed her gaze. Yes. And now she is... Fine, Clara said. She will be fine. She straightened. She had been leaning fractionally toward him, and she straightened. And I should see her home before Mrs. Hartwell begins to insist on another half hour. She looked at him. He looked at her. Good evening, Your Grace, she said. Voss, he said. Just that. Her surname, without the prefix, without the formality that had cushioned it every time before. Not quite easy, not quite formal, something negotiating the distance between the two. She did not have a word for what it was. She moved toward the dancers. She did not look back. She thought about the cowper on the parlour table. She thought about what it had cost him to say the name of a dead woman in a ballroom. She thought, end of the week. She found Lydia. She put a hand briefly on her sister's arm. Lydia looked at her and, with the specific acuity of a younger sister, glanced once toward the east wall. He is still watching, Lydia said, at a volume only Clara could hear. Said Clara. That is not an answer. It was not a question, said Clara. Come, Mrs. Hartwell will want her wrap. They went to find Mrs. Hartwell. Clara did not look at the east wall. She had already looked. She knew what was there. The season, she thought, had gone on long enough. On Friday she would go home. Friday morning, Bruton Street. The trunks were packed by 7. Clara had done most of it herself, which Mrs. Pond had considered a personal affront and had said so, loudly to the second housemaid, in the corridor outside Clara's door. Clara had continued folding and said nothing, because Mrs. Pond's feelings about the correct division of domestic labour were between Mrs. Pond and Mrs. Pond, and Clara had things to put in order. Lydia had packed the previous evening in a mood of philosophical calm that Clara found both admirable and slightly unnerving. She had sorted her new gowns, written a brief and courteous note to Mr. Cavendish Price, thanking him for the dances, and gone to bed at 10. She had not mentioned Captain Aldridge since the evening of their conversation in the sitting-room, which was either resolution or suppression, and Clara had decided for now to treat as the former. Mrs. Hartwell was tearful at breakfast, which was her custom at partings, and pressed Clara to stay another week, and then another fortnight, and then, in what felt like a negotiating position, until the end of the month. Clara ate her toast and said she was grateful and that it was time, and by 9:30 had said farewell with genuine warmth and was in the carriage with Lydia and the first of the trunks. The streets were doing their morning business. Clara watched them through the window and thought about nothing in particular, which was the kind of thinking that was actually thinking about something very specific indeed. Lydia beside her was reading, or holding a book. The page had not turned in 8 minutes. "You may say whatever you are not saying," Clara offered. Lydia turned a page deliberately. "I am reading." "So you have been reading page 47 for 8 minutes." Lydia looked up. Her expression was the particular expression of a younger sister who has a great deal to say, and is choosing her moment. "Do you know what I find interesting?" "Many things, I expect." He did not come to say goodbye. Clara looked out the window. Why would he? "Because," Lydia said with the precision of someone who has been composing this sentence for some time, "he has found reasons to be where you are for the past 6 weeks, and this morning, when you are specifically leaving, he is conspicuously elsewhere. People are elsewhere on Friday mornings. They have engagements." "Clara!" "Lydia!" Lydia closed the book. "I am not going to argue about it. I am simply noting it for the record." "The record," Clara said, "does not require the notation." "Good," said Lydia, and opened her book again. Clara watched London thinning at the edges, the houses becoming less pressed, the streets wider, the smell changing, and did not think about the east wall of the Mortlake ballroom. She thought about it anyway. They stopped at an inn at Barton Cross for the horses and a meal, and it was while Clara was eating without tasting anything in particular that she became aware of a disturbance at the inn's entrance, not dramatic, simply the kind of minor reorganization that happens when someone of consequence arrives and the staff adjust accordingly. She did not look up immediately. She was making a point to herself of not looking up. Then Lydia put down her fork with a sound that had a shape to it. Clara looked up. Crestwell was standing in the doorway of the private dining room, wearing riding clothes that suggested he had come on horseback, which meant he had left London some time after their carriage and had covered the same ground considerably faster. His expression was exactly what it always was, held, controlled, with the addition of something that was not quite uncertainty, but occupied the same neighbourhood. He saw her, she saw him. Lydia picked up her fork again, with the composure of a woman who had been expecting this, and did not intend to make a scene about being right. "Your Grace," Clara said. "Miss Voss." He came in. He did not sit, he was not invited to sit, and he did not presume. He stood with the same economy he occupied most spaces. "I am travelling north." Clara looked at him. "North," she said. "To Northumberland." He did not elaborate. He did not, she noted, look away. "Northumberland," she said carefully, "is north." "Yes." "This road," she said, "does not go to Northumberland." A pause. "There are," he said, "various routes. This is not one of them." He was quiet. Lydia had removed herself from the conversation with the thoroughness of someone who had decided to become architecturally invisible, which she managed surprisingly well for a person of her colouring. "No," he said, "it is not." Clara looked at him steadily. "Then where are you going?" He held her gaze. "I am not entirely certain." It was the most honest thing, she thought, she had ever heard him say. It was honest in the way that things are honest when they have been dragged into the open against a person's better judgment, and which carry, because of that, a weight that polished honesty never does. "Sit down," she said. "You may as well eat something." He sat. Lydia called for another setting with the serene efficiency of someone operating according to a plan she had made at least 2 hours ago. They did not speak of it during the meal. They spoke of roads and the weather's intentions and the relative merits of various coaching inns, and Lydia contributed to the conversation with great energy and a complete absence of subtext, which was generous of her. Crestwell ate. He drank the inn's wine, which was not good, without commenting on it. He answered Lydia's questions about Northumberland with the kind of detail that told Clara he was not improvising the destination. He knew the place, had feelings about it, went quiet in a specific way when he described the coast. "You love it," Lydia said with the directness of the very young. He looked at her. "I suppose I do." "Then why are you in London?" "The season," he said. "But you hate the season." "Lydia," Clara said. "I am not being rude," Lydia said with some justification. "I am asking an honest question." Crestwell looked at Lydia with the expression of a man who has been surprised by something small. "Yes," he said, "I hate the season." "Then next year," said Lydia cheerfully, "don't come." The table was quiet for a moment. "That," Crestwell said, and did not finish the sentence, but there was something in his voice that Clara caught and put away. When the meal was done and the horses were ready, Lydia discovered that she had left something in the dining room, a glove, which Clara suspected existed only insofar as Lydia had decided it was needed, and went back to find it with an efficiency of timing that could only have been planned. This left Clara in the inn's front yard by the carriage in the April afternoon with Crestwell. He had his horse's reins in his hand. He was not getting on the horse. Neither of them was moving toward their respective vehicles. "So you are going home," he said. "Yes." "To Derbyshire." "To Derbyshire." She looked at him. The afternoon light was doing what April light does when it finally commits. Gold, clear, slightly too honest. "Your Grace, what are you doing here?" "I told you, So you said you were travelling to Northumberland by a road that does not go to Northumberland," she said. "I'm asking what you are doing here, specifically." He was quiet. The horse shifted and he settled it without looking at it. "I did not want to—" He stopped. He started again, more slowly, like a man picking his way across ground he is not sure of. "You said you were leaving on Friday. I found on Friday morning that I—" Another stop. "I had things to say." "Then say them." "I am trying to." "You are taking rather a long time." He looked at her. There was something raw in it, not distressed, not dramatic, but present, which was different from his usual quality of being contained. He was present in the way people are when they have run out of the performance of not being present. "I have not been since Eleanor died." The name arrived in the air between them. He had not used it before. He had said she and her, and once she was quiet, but not the name. "Eleanor," Clara said carefully. "Yes." He looked at the horse's neck. "She was. We had been engaged a year. She was not. It was not a passionate attachment. It was a considered one. We suited." He paused. "She died in October of the year before I inherited, which meant that within the same 12 months I had lost her and gained—" a slight gesture that encompassed the title, the estates, the season of centerpiece discussions at Almack's. "And I have not—" He stopped again. Clara waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned it at her father's knee, sitting in the study while parishioners worked out what they had come to say. "I have not permitted myself to—" He looked at her. "And then you were there." She looked at him. "In the card room," he said, "telling me you were describing cards, clearly." The word "clearly." She remembered saying it. She remembered the laugh she had not been expecting. "That was 3 weeks ago," she said. "I am aware. You have had 3 weeks to—" "I know." He was very slightly frustrated with himself, which was possibly the most human thing she had seen from him in 6 weeks. "I am not good at this." "This," she said, "being specific." "Being—" He did not finish the sentence, but the word he had not said arrived anyway. "Honest." "Yes." Clara looked at him for a moment. The yard was quiet. A stable boy was doing something with a bucket at the far end. Lydia was in the inn finding a glove that did not exist. "Your Grace," she said, "you inherited a title you were not prepared for, lost a woman you had built a considered life around, and spent 6 weeks at a season you despise, during which you counted exits and played cards, and followed a road that does not go to Northumberland." She paused. "I am not sure what you are telling me. I am asking you to be clear." He looked at her with the expression she had first seen in Hatherswick's library. Assessing, recalibrating, landing somewhere he had not expected. "I would like," he said, "to call on you in Derbyshire." Clara said, "Why?" Not unkindly, a question with the precision she had learned to bring to questions. He held her gaze. "Because I have not laughed in 2 years, and then you were in a card room, and I did." and I have not been able to—" He stopped. "And because you look at rooms the way I do, and because you are not easy, and I am grateful for it." She looked at him. "You told your valet," she said, "that I was pretty enough and sharp as a spoon." The silence that followed had considerable texture. "I did not—" He stopped. "How do you—" "A word at your club," Clara said pleasantly, "travels further than you might expect, particularly when the word is about a woman someone has noticed a duke noticing." She waited. "Well?" He did not, to his credit, pretend she had misheard. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been caught and is deciding whether to compound it or not. "I said it," he said, "in my defense." "I do not think," Clara said, "that defense is the right approach." He closed his mouth. "I am sharp as a spoon," she said, "in case you have missed the evidence." His mouth moved. He was trying not to smile. He did not entirely succeed. "I had not," he said, "missed the evidence." "And the evidence," she said, "has had 6 weeks to observe you in return." "And?" She looked at him. The afternoon light, the inn-yard, the horse that was patient beyond its deserts. "You are proud," she said, "in the way that people are proud when they are frightened. You are accustomed to the world not answering back, and you have mistaken that for comfort. You are—" She paused. "You are grieving something you have not been permitted to grieve properly, because you inherited a title at the same moment, and the title required you to be someone who does not grieve." He was very still. "And you are," she said, "better than you perform." The stable boy had disappeared. The yard was very quiet. "Miss Voss," he said after a moment. His voice was different. Something had gone out of it, the held quality, the management, not gone entirely, but lower, like a flame, adjusted. "Clara," she said. She heard herself say it and did not take it back. "If you are going to follow roads that don't go to Northumberland, you may as well." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not the quick, controlled smile from the card-room, but something slower and more serious and entirely unprepared. "Clara," he said. That was all, her name in his voice without any of the armor. Lydia emerged from the inn with a glove she had found and was holding with the careful triumph of a woman who had had it in her pocket the whole time. "Are we ready?" she said with magnificent innocence. Derbyshire, 3 weeks later, June. The Voss house in Derbyshire was not large. It was the sort of house that had been built for the purpose of being adequate, and had then accrued over generations a number of things: a good library, a rose garden of unexpected ambition, a view from the upper windows that made up for most of what the house itself lacked, that elevated it past adequacy into something that felt, at various times of day, like enough. Her father, Reverend George Voss, was a man of 62, narrow in the shoulder and wide in the mind, who had spent 40 years reading everything he could find and talking to people about what he had read and listening, with what Clara considered his most underrated quality, to what they said back. He had received Clara's letter about the season, with the tolerant interest of a man who has resigned himself to not being told everything and has learned to read between the lines. He had received her second letter, the one she had written from the Barton Cross Inn, while Lydia was ordering tea and Crestwell was seeing to his horse, with the expression, she imagined, of a man reading between the lines and finding the lines rather closer together than expected. He had written back, "Come home, bring your sister, and tell me whatever is true." She had done the first 2. The third she was still negotiating with herself. June in Derbyshire was an argument that June always won. The air was what it was supposed to be. The hills were the colour of things that had decided to grow without asking permission. Clara walked every morning and found, to her own mild surprise, that she was not as relieved to be home as she had expected, and not as unsettled as she perhaps should have been, and that these 2 facts occupied the same space without contradicting each other in the way they ought. Lydia had reverted, within 24 hours of arriving, to the version of herself that existed in Derbyshire. Less finished, more direct, inclined to spend time in the garden without her hat on, and to argue with their father about theology over supper, which their father encouraged, because he believed that argument properly conducted was a form of prayer. She did not mention London. She mentioned Mr. Cavendish Price once, briefly, in a tone that was not pining but was not dismissal either. She said nothing about Captain Aldridge, and Clara said nothing about Captain Aldridge, and the subject occupied a corner of the house the way objects do when everyone knows they are there and no one moves them. On the Tuesday of the 2nd week, their father appeared in the library doorway while Clara was not reading and said, "A letter came for you. on the hall table. She knew the handwriting. She waited until her father had gone back to his study and then went to the hall table and read the letter standing up, which was inefficient and which she did not correct. The letter said, "I leave London at the end of the week. I have business in Nottingham that will take at most 3 days. Nottinghamshire, I am told, is adjacent to Derbyshire. I trust the journey finds you well. Crestwell." And then beneath it, as though added after the letter was already composed, "To for." She looked at the single initial for a moment. Then she put the letter in her pocket, which was not the drawer in the writing desk in Bruton Street, but served the same function, and went back to the library. She told her father that evening. She did not plan to. She had been planning a more orderly disclosure, something measured and contextual. But they were sitting after supper with the windows open onto the garden, and her father was reading Cowper, and she looked at the volume in his hands and said, "There is someone who may call." Her father looked up. He was very good at the specific quality of attention that did not rush. "Someone," he said. "Crestwell," she said, "the Duke of Crestwell." Her father set down the Cowper. He looked at her with the expression he wore when he was doing the mental equivalent of turning a question over in his hands to find its weight. "And how," he said, "did you come to know the Duke of Crestwell?" "He was at Almack's," Clara said, "and the Hatherswick reception, and a card game, and a coaching inn in Barton Cross." "That is," her father said, "a great many places." "Yes." "And you," he paused, "you wish him to call?" Clara looked at her father. She had been deciding on the walk back from the garden whether she wished him to call, and had arrived at the conclusion that she had already decided, and the deciding she was doing now was the decorative kind. "Yes," she said. Her father looked at her for another moment. "You are not uncertain." "I am frequently uncertain. I am not uncertain about this. Tell me about him." So she did. She told him about the exits and the card game, and the letter signed with an initial, and Eleanor, whose name she used with the particular care one uses with names that carry weight. She told him about the valet, and the spoon, and the inn-yard. She told him about the way the season had begun with his expression held and managed, and had ended with her name, without the armour. Her father listened. He was, as she had always believed, very good at listening. When she finished, he said, "He made you laugh." "He laughed," she said. "I was the cause of it. That is the same thing from where I sit." She looked at her father. "You are not going to caution me about rank." "I am a clergyman in Derbyshire," he said, "not a fool." He picked up the Cowper again. "Tell him to come." He came on a Thursday, which Clara had always considered an unlucky day for correspondence, and was revising her view on. She saw the horse from the upper window, a grey she recognized, and did not go down immediately because going down immediately would have told her father and Lydia a great deal that she preferred to deliver on her own terms. She took 3 minutes to finish the letter she had been writing, capped the pen and went downstairs at a pace that she intended to be unhurried and suspected was not. Lydia was already in the hall. "I was passing," Lydia said with extraordinary innocence. "You live here?" Clara said. "Yes," said Lydia. "Isn't that convenient?" Her father received Crestwell in the front room, which was the right room, with the particular graciousness of a man who has decided to like someone and is giving them a chance to be worth it. Crestwell was— Clara watched this from the doorway for a moment before she came in, not performing. He was not charming in the way he had been in London drawing-rooms, where charm was a mode of deflection. He was direct. He answered her father's questions about Northumberland and the estate with the kind of detail that comes from caring about a thing, and when her father asked him about the title, not directly, but in the way her father asked things, which was sideways and careful, he said, "I was not prepared for it. I am still learning what it requires of me." Her father looked at him. "And what does it require?" "More patience," Crestwell said, "than I have naturally." Her father's eyes moved briefly to Clara, which she pretended not to see. They had tea. Lydia was present and charming, and contributed to the conversation with the precise amount of animation that made her an asset rather than a distraction, which was a skill Clara had not known her to possess, and which she filed under further evidence that 19 is not the final word on anyone. After tea, her father suggested, with the transparency of a man who has decided to be transparent rather than pretend otherwise, that the garden was looking well, and that he and Lydia had been meaning to examine what the roses were doing, and that Clara might perhaps show His Grace the library, which had some volumes of note. Papa, Clara said. The gibbon alone, her father said serenely, is worth 20 minutes. He and Lydia left. The door was, as propriety required, not entirely closed. The library was the best room in the house. She had always known this, but she knew it differently now, seeing it as something new. The shelves that reached the ceiling, the 2 windows that faced the garden, the writing desk by the east wall, the pair of chairs before the fireplace, the morning light coming in clear and unhurried. Crestwell stood in the middle of the room and looked at it. Your father's collection, he said. His and mine now. He gave me the Derbyshire shelf when I was 12. She moved to the shelves. He said I had earned it by surviving the gibbon. Had you? With moderate scarring. She turned. He was closer than she had tracked, not by much, but enough that the room had become smaller in the intervening moment. You came on a Thursday. Is that? I used to think Thursday was unlucky for correspondence. She looked at him. I am revising the view. He looked at her. In this light Derbyshire morning, honest and wide, his face was different from every other place she had seen it. Not the ballroom, not Hatherswick's library, not the inn-yard. Here the held quality was still present, but changed. Not something being managed against the room, but something being held carefully. The way you hold something you do not want to drop. Clara, he said. 4 syllables, no armour. Yes, she said. I should... He stopped. Then, I should have said at Almack something other than counting exits. You said it eventually, she said, in an inn-yard in Barton Cross. That was 3 weeks later, yes. She looked at him. You were slow. I was frightened, she said. She said it without softening it because she had learned that he heard things better when they were not softened. It is not a criticism. I was also frightened. He was still. You did not appear... I count exits, she said. I watch rooms. I stay near walls. She paused. I went home. He looked at her for a moment. You went home, he said, and I followed you on the wrong road. Yes. That seems, he considered, disproportionate. It was the right proportion, she said, for what it was. He was quiet for a moment. The garden moved in the windows behind him, a breeze through the roses, the light shifting. I have 2 estates, he said. Neither of them is, since Eleanor they have been managed, but not... He stopped. Northumberland is empty in the way a house is empty when no one has made a home of it. He looked at the shelves. I had forgotten what a room looked like when someone has read the books. Clara looked at her library. She saw it as he was seeing it, marked, used, lived in. The shelf her father had given her, the chair with the worn arm, the cowper on the table because she had brought it from Bruton Street and not yet decided where to put it. She had not yet decided where to put it. She picked it up. She held it for a moment, and then she held it out to him. He looked at it, then at her. The cowper, she said, has been moving between us for 2 months. You left it in Hatherswick's library. I brought it to Bruton Street. I brought it home. She paused. It has been on that table for 3 weeks, because I could not decide whether to shelve it. He took it from her. His fingers brushed hers, not quite accidental, not quite deliberate, in the territory between the two where most true things live. Crestwell, she said. He looked up. Frederick, he said. She considered it, the name without the title. Frederick, she said. If you call on me in this county, you will be calling on a clergyman's daughter with no particular prospects and a habit of saying what she means and very little patience for performing otherwise. I am aware, he said. And if my father writes to you, he will ask you questions in the sideways manner that makes people think they are answering something else, and you will find that you have committed to positions you did not know you held. That also, he said, I am prepared for. And I will not, she paused. She found unexpectedly that this was the thing she had been most afraid of saying and had therefore left for last. I will not be smaller. If that is... Clara. His voice was quiet, not soft. He was not by nature a soft man, but stripped of everything that was not the thing itself. It is why I followed the wrong road. She looked at him. The morning light, the library, the cowper in his hands. I will take you to see the view from the upper window, she said. It is the best thing about the house. After that you may call again on Saturday if you choose to, and my father will have thought of more questions. And you, he said, will you have thought of more questions? Certainly, she said. I always have more questions. Ask them. Not all at once, she said. I have time. She moved toward the door. He fell into step beside her, not behind, not half a step in the deferential way people stepped when rank required it, but beside, which was, she thought, the first thing he had done that was entirely without performance. They went up the stairs. She showed him the window. He looked out at the hills going green in the June morning and said nothing for a moment, and she stood beside him and said nothing also, and the silence was the kind that does not cost anything. "It is," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. The hills were behind her, and the light was doing what light does in June in Derbyshire, which is make everything look as though it intended to be exactly this. "Voss," he said. 3 times now in one register or another, the card-room, the ball-room, and here. And this was different from all of them. Not formal, not careful, not negotiating distance. Her surname in his voice with nothing between them. "Frederick," she said back. He looked at the hills again. She looked at the hills. Below in the garden she could hear her father and Lydia in an argument about roses that had the comfortable sound of an argument nobody intended to win. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. The hills were very green. The roses below were doing as they liked, as they always had. Inside, on the table in the library, the cowper sat where he had set it down, in a room where someone had read the books, with both windows open to the morning.